I had talked to other people before about abandoned spaces, so I'd always used that as a kind of a line, but I had always gotten some weird responses. One person was like, "Oh, you're going to murder me if we go to some abandoned space." I just remember matching with Fletcher, and he had a picture on his profile of him at some school, and there was some green ivy on the windows, and I clearly could see it was abandoned. And then I just knew that from there, it's the right fit.
Hi, my name is Blake, and welcome to Abandoned, the All-American Ruins podcast. We're between seasons now, but rather than abandon your RSS feed, I'm going to do exactly what I did last season. Share a few bonus episodes while I dive into production on season 3. So, if you haven't listened to the show yet, I gently suggest that you go back to the beginning of the series so that you get a better sense of what I typically do here. I want you to imagine your worst first date. Where did you go? What did you do? Why was that your worst?
My name is Fletcher Petrucci, and I currently work for United Airlines as a flight attendant. I would consider myself an urban explorer, photographer, or videographer.
Now, I want you to imagine your best first date. Same questions. Where'd you go? What did you do? Why was that the best?
My name is Louis and Inghilterra. I am currently an interior designer in the Denver area, and I consider myself a photographer, urban explorer, and also a history seeker.
Personally, my best first date was a picnic. A guy asked me to go to Fort Tryon, close to the northern tip of Manhattan. He laid out snacks, and we watched the Hudson River drift by. It was sweet and low-key. But out of all the first date stories I've heard, Louis and Fletcher's is certainly the most original. Sort of a dream date, actually, at least for people like me. They met exploring an abandoned building, a hospital, but the story of how they found each other in Colorado is a lovely modern queer tale of love, fate, and of course, abandoned spaces.
Across the great flat of the land, across the desert and the open plains they come. From the beehives of the east, the woodlands of the northwest. They come to visit, to make a home, to capture the beauty and the grandeur which is uniquely Colorado.
The story that brought me out to Colorado is a pretty interesting, odd one. If you are aware of what Atlantis is, I was on one of those cruises and I happened to meet this couple who turned out to be some of the nicest people I'd ever met. And we were all really drunk one night and we're joking around. And I was like, "Oh, I really want to get out of West Virginia. I've lived there my whole life." And they jokingly were saying, "Oh, hey, why don't you just move to Colorado with us?" They already lived here. And literally the whole cruise, we just hung out the whole time.
When Fletcher got back home, he walked into issues with the house that he was living in and decided he was ready for something new. So he took a big risk and he called the couple.
I was like, "Hey, were you joking about me moving there, or was this serious?" And they're like, "No, you want to come visit." So I came down here and I hung out here, and then I flew back and got all my things and moved down here with everything that fit in my car.
As a native Coloradan who was surrounded by homophobia my entire life, learning Louis and Fletcher's story warmed my heart. An openly gay couple in Colorado? That's preposterous. But let's rewind a bit. In the fall of 2023, I was home reporting a story for History Colorado's podcast, Lost Highways. Louis found me on Instagram because he worked for the Borscht Belt Historical Marker Project with Marissa Scheinfeld, who I profiled in a bonus episode last season. He saw I was in Colorado, so we got coffee, and next thing you know, I immediately had a new Urbex friend.
I moved out to Colorado in 2019 for Colorado State University. I wanted to go directly into preservation. I ideally want to go in, renovate spaces, and preserve them. I realized that I've always had kind of an interest in interior design, and I thought that would be compatible. The preservation field focuses on renovation and reconfiguring spaces.
The second he landed in Colorado, Louis fell in love with it.
I enjoyed the way of life out here. I could just sense it when I was here, that it just was going to be a change of pace that I was used to on the East Coast. And I had a lot of friends from college that moved down here and had an offer to move in with a really close friend of mine with his band. So we were looking for houses and landed down here. For now, it's a good spot to be.
Something both Louis and Fletcher have in common is their desire for adventure, and of course, their love of the unknown, the unseen. And for Fletcher, this is deeply rooted in his West Virginian upbringing.
Harper's Ferry is a national park where the John Brown's raid, part of the Civil War, happened. You can stand in Virginia, Maryland, and West Virginia all at the same time, and the rivers converge in the middle. We were right outside of D.C., so I spent a lot of time in D.C. taking the metro and stuff because we had access to that. But I would say that the area that I grew up in was a small-town vibe.
But it wasn't just his small-town vibe that instilled that sense of wonder in him, the what's behind that locked door kind of thinking. It was the people he grew up with, specifically his grandfather.
My grandfather's name was Dale, but everybody called him Binky. He had this weird nickname since, I guess, childhood, and he was more like a father figure to me. And as a kid, I was always interested in the history of places. Driving around, I would be like, oh, I want to stop and look inside that abandoned house. I was the type of kid that when we would be visiting people's homes, I would be nosy and wanted to see, like, in people's basements and stuff.
Binky didn't stop Fletcher from always wondering, what's behind that locked door? Instead, he encouraged Fletcher's natural curiosity, especially when it came to abandoned properties all over Harper's Ferry.
He eventually would start taking me into these places and would tell me what he remembered about them. That became our weekend activity, and I had this really close friend. Me, him, and my grandfather would go out like literally every weekend, and my grandfather was kind of the wingman where he would sit outside and watch for security while me and my friend Brandon went inside. And then if security rolled up, my grandfather would be wearing his Park Service uniform and would be like, oh, I'm here taking photos, just distracting so we could get out of the building. We had a really cool relationship, and he actually got me into a lot of places, and he was super supportive of it.
It was a similar experience for Louis. Since he can remember, he's been interested in old things, ancient things, unseen things. But his lifelong love of bygone artifacts, buildings, and properties stems from a much deeper, more painful source.
So I was raised in Hudson Valley, New York, about an hour from New York City. I had always had a passion for antiques and historical architecture since I was around 5 years old. I attribute it to many things. My father passed away in 9/11, and I inherited a large collection of his vinyl records and guitars. And so at a young age, I had a curiosity for antiques because I was surrounded by my dad's possessions.
Louis's father, Louis Sr., worked for Fiduciary Trust Company International, which occupied offices on the 90th floor as well as floors 94 to 97 of the South Tower at the World Trade Center.
Jim, just a few moments ago, something believed to be a plane crashed into the South Tower of the World Trade Center.
Mr. Inghilterra's name is listed on the south pool of the 9/11 memorial. In addition to serving as a treasurer at FTCI, he was also a musician, played in a rock band for 30 years, and idolized Frank Zappa. After the loss of his father, Louis was raised by his mother Diane, who'd only been married to Louis Sr. for 5 years when he passed.
I was raised as an only child, and we would do a lot of trips back and forth to central Pennsylvania, where my mom's family was. and we would go to historical houses around the East Coast. I even had my kindergarten birthday party at Washington Irving's in Tarrytown, New York.
Armed with inspiration from his parents, Louis's appreciation for history and things left behind was amplified significantly when he started to climb into his early teen years.
I had a babysitter, Georgie, who was very much in tune with my interests. She would take me to museums in New York City, and she was very much into history and antiques. In the town I was growing up in, Katona, New York, there was these ruins of an abandoned mental hospital called Bailey Hall School. I remember going with Georgie, and then I just remember looking up different abandoned places in New York. And that's how I found the Pines Hotel in the Catskills and the Borscht Belt and the Tamarack Lodge, and stumbled upon another smaller hotel called the Ulster Lake House. It was my first time in an abandoned space, and it was just such a magical experience that I still remember to this day.
Even though Louis's memories of his father are virtually non-existent, he knows that his parents were inseparable. And perhaps the story he knows about their marriage, and the story about after his father passed, influenced his own grown-up feelings about what he's looking for in a partner, and how to show up for that person.
They had an amazing relationship, and he was very excited to become a father. My parents were both pretty late bringing me up. My dad, I think, was around 45, and my mom was 5 years younger than him. Their relationship is unique in the sense that they didn't have really like interests, kind of just opposites attract, versus Fletcher and I's relationship really is surrounded by our love for abandoned spaces and architecture and antiques.
By 2023, both Louis and Fletcher had settled in Colorado, but the adjustment wasn't without natural growing pains for Fletcher.
It's definitely been a change, more so than I even thought. A very scary change, but comparatively, I've been to Baltimore, I've been to DC, I've been to major cities. I'm no stranger to travel and going places and being in new, uncomfortable situations, but this was different because now I'm living here with people that I just met in a completely new environment, and I can't just run home to my grandparents when something goes wrong.
No matter the discomfort that he experienced with the monumental shift, he came out the other side feeling at home in the mile-high city and ready to dive into the dating pool in one way or another. And of course, as a Gen Zer, one of the best places to meet a potential partner came right from the comfort of his own smartphone.
We met on Tinder, and it was funny. We matched, and he had this picture of him sitting in a bathtub. And he asked if I could guess what type of building that photo was taken in. And I answered with asylum. And then we made this plan. We met up, got burritos, and literally within like an hour of meeting each other, we're in an abandoned hospital on the roof.
Fletcher knew pretty quickly what he wanted. And from the beginning, he wasn't afraid to express those feelings to Louis.
I would say I was very obsessed.
I was literally constantly nagging him about getting into a relationship, and we hadn't even known each other for that long.
But for Louis, it was his first relationship, and he felt like taking it a tad slower than Fletcher might have wanted.
I'd been searching for someone for a while. I kind of was done with the hookup circuit. I had talked to other people before about abandoned spaces, so I'd always use that as a kind of a line, but I had always gotten some weird responses. One person was like, "Oh, you're going to murder me if we go to some abandoned space." I just remember matching with Fletcher, and he had a picture on his profile of him at some school, and there was some green ivy on the windows, and I clearly could see it was abandoned. And then I just knew that from there it was the right fit.
While Louis and Fletcher started toying with the word relationship, they began revealing their own respective worlds, introducing each other to the places they grew up, where each of their own obsessions with abandoned spaces first originated.
We spent a couple days in Baltimore, and then we came back. And I originally wanted to go back to the hospital that we had first met at. And I went out and bought flowers and hid them in my backpack. And we tried to get inside, but they boarded it up. So I had to resort to giving them to him at his house.
Finally, Fletcher had had enough, and he was ready to ask Louis the big question.
After we met, I went back to the East Coast and helped my mom move. And throughout that time, we talked a little bit, but it was just really exciting for me to come back and spend more time with Fletcher, even after our small meetup in Baltimore to explore some abandoned stuff. I missed him during that trip, and as soon as I came back, he gave me flowers, said, "You want to start this up?" And I said, "Absolutely."
I was trying to create this whole sweet thing, and then we ended up in a relationship.
As Louis and Fletcher's relationship grew over the first few months, they began to connect in very intimate ways, the likes of which neither were used to, namely Louis, since he'd never been in a relationship before. And as is the case with any romantic relationship, he learned in real time what it was he was really looking for in a partner.
I would say starting off like a close friend and someone really that cares for you deeply is always there for you. We kind of give each other space because, first of all, we live about half an hour from each other, but I think it's helpful early on to not be totally involved with the person every waking hour.
Despite Louis being older than Fletcher, he felt inexperienced and, as such, was willing to learn from Fletcher as they go.
This is my first relationship I've been in, so it's all kind of new to me, and I give the reins over to Fletcher a little bit because he's been in a couple before.
Fletcher was happy to show Louis what he'd learned in previous relationships, especially as far as communication is concerned.
I would say a big thing without a relationship is communication, and I would say that both of us back and forth have always been super open to each other about literally anything, even the most embarrassing little things. In previous relationships, I think I've struggled with that because it's always seemed like there's been this weird disconnect where I feel like there shouldn't be.
In addition to communication, Fletcher also sees boundaries and layers of a relationship the same way that Louis does.
He is my boyfriend, but at the end of the day, he's also my friend. And we have that connection where it's not just a meet up, have sex, go on a date night thing. We have all this other stuff that we do outside of that I think makes our relationship so much more interesting and keeps it fun. The space thing is new to me. Every other relationship I've ever been in, we've been a constant up each other's ass. Whereas this one, I felt like I had to back off a little bit and give a little bit more space. Once I did that, I kind of realized that, it was better for both of us because we aren't getting tired of each other. When we see each other, it makes it more special.
I kind of like that about our relationship. We give each other boundaries and space, but also at the same time, I think it makes our time together more important and more valuable.
And it's in that shared time together, both exploring abandoned spaces the way they both enjoy doing, that Louis and Fletcher have had some truly unique experiences, including scarier ones that have illuminated their own deeper understandings of abandoned spaces.
One of the things with abandoned spaces is that there's kind of a mysterious aspect to them. We find that to be more prevalent in abandoned spaces out in the plains, not just about how people abandon them, but what other things are going on with them.
But it was one particular experience at an abandoned space that really gave them a mystery to ponder.
Fletcher and I had been exploring this abandoned farmhouse. We've been there a couple times. It was all intact. The house had no trespassing signs, had no barriers in front. Everything was left. In the back, someone had been housing about 30 dogs in these makeshift cages.
Cages made up of miscellaneous building materials. So it looked like somebody had tied together pallets and fences and tarps over top of it with 30 dogs inside of the enclosures.
One of our inferences on it was someone squatting in a sense. It's not the property owner of the house. It's someone else that's just using this property for these dogs for whatever reason. And there were no houses around. And we called animal control to see if they can come out. We haven't heard anything back yet, but it is one example of strange happenings that occur out in the nomad's land of the plains.
Of course, it's not all spooky, scary inferences of what might have happened in any given abandoned space. In fact, that's a pretty rare occurrence, at least in my experience. But more importantly, it's the beauty of what these spaces represent, the stories they tell through the wreckage of what's left behind.
There's this video I have up right now of this old Kmart building that was built on the top of this house that burned down with this family that was inside.
At Kmart stores they understand.
Kmart is your savings store.
People are still coming back to this video and telling me about how they used to shop at this Kmart. And like, it's just minuscule little things like that where I've captured this space in this moment where it may be dead and abandoned, but somebody comes back and looks at it, and then they get this memory from watching this video, like, oh, well, I stayed at this hotel, or, oh, I got married here, or, oh, I used to shop here with my kids, or I remember my mom taking me here. And that always brings me a lot of joy. Like, oh my God, I can't believe you like documented this.
Buried in the walls of abandoned America are stories about our history, who we are, where we've been, where we're going, symbols of both the failures and the resiliency of our humanity, folktales about finding and depending on and celebrating community, both accurate and embellished. And memories, a vast universe of memories where people, in the midst of all the collective trauma and turmoil, can, hopefully, remember why being alive is as magical as it is horrifying, if we're so lucky to be there at all.
I have basically, in a way, preserved history.
Capturing these elusive stories and preserving them is, I think, vital to perpetuating the human race's existence. If we can't lean into our past to help us out in our present, then how can we expect to make an ongoing future for ourselves?
There was a quote that I remember hearing about from some explorer who said that basically abandoned spaces are almost like the fourth dimension. It's a dimension that you can't really replicate anywhere else. I guess the opposite of a metropolis, a happy sort of place, but that a lot of people view as being depressed or not worthy of exploring. But in an explorer's eyes, it's very much alive, a lot that people don't see on the surface that we explorers experience and understand.
Remember that best first date I asked you to think about at the beginning of the episode? Do you remember what you talked about on that date?
I love Fletcher's drive to experience new places and pick up different things. I hope that I influenced him for some of that stuff.
As you revealed more to each other through conversation, did your interest only grow because you'd realized you suddenly met someone who saw the world the same way you do, maybe? That your values were aligned? That you both wanted to live your individual lives in a certain way that somehow felt compatible to one another, even though you couldn't quite put your finger on what it was that made them so compatible?
I admire the way that he looks at life, always wanting to go to like a penny arcade or something like that. Even now, he has me pointing out signs and things like that, little things that I wouldn't have noticed before, but he immediately catches on to it.
I admire Fletcher for his willingness to just pick up anything and go on an adventure. He's just a really great storyteller, and I really admire that about him. I really admire Fletcher's ability to document history through videography. It also just boils down to the memory of the experience as well. The things we say when we're walking around in an abandoned space.
Both Louis and Fletcher find so much value in the other and focus on sharing those admirations with each other, openly, honestly. It helps them grow as individuals, which in turn helps keep their relationship healthy, strong, and constantly expanding.
Oh my God, if you need a playlist for any occasion, he can pull out like 5 records within a minute. Overall, he's just a really positive person and always has a different outlook on things that may be negative, and he's always finding a solution or some way to be happy and bouncy about it. Louis brings a light into a room I don't know how he does it because I can't really put a finger on exactly. There's a lot of different little things, but if we're having a party or a dinner party at the house, somehow Louis is always like the driving light.
If you're just tuning in, then welcome to the second season of Abandoned, the All-American Ruins podcast. I hope you enjoyed listening to this bonus episode as much as I enjoyed making it. We'll keep them coming out until Season 3 drops in the fall sometime. Until then, Seasons 1 and 2 are available wherever you get your podcasts, so make sure you subscribe. Also, if you like to read or enjoy amateur photography, just know that you can catch up on more of my adventures at allamericanruins.com or follow me on Instagram at allamericanruins. Abandoned, the All-American Ruins podcast is written, engineered, hosted, edited, mixed, and produced by me, Blake Pfeil, with studio space courtesy of Radio Kingston, WKNY, AM 1490, FM 1079 in Kingston, New York. Thanks for listening.